It was an ordinary Wednesday afternoon in Lisbon during the International Pastoral Congress, and everyone was wrapping up what had been an engaging event. Cardinal Luis Antonio Tagle, admired for his warm demeanor and thoughtful insights, had just shared his reflections on synodality and listening to the Church's marginalized voices. As he finished, the room, packed with more than 300 delegates, erupted in applause, showing their appreciation. With a humble gesture, he prepared to offer a closing prayer in English. There was a multilingual team ready to translate, as always. But then something extraordinary unfolded. As he bowed his head, his hands resting on the lectern, something changed. His voice didn't just sound different, it felt heavier and more resonant. To everyone's astonishment, the first words he uttered were not in English, Latin, Tagalog, or any language he normally spoke. The atmosphere in the room shifted dramatically. People fell silent, their pens stopping mid-note as heads turned to listen. A translator near the front looked frozen, her pen slipping from her fingers, while another woman began to weep, completely taken by the moment. The words he spoke were clear and deliberate, yet they were completely unrecognizable. Some attendees described it as echoing an ancient tongue, while others thought it resembled a Semitic language or something even older than Hebrew. What truly astonished everyone was the reaction that followed. Several audience members, who were not positioned closely together, began to quietly share translations among themselves. Despite the differences in language, Portuguese, French, Swahili, Tagalog, they all connected with the same core message. The name is spoken not just with the mouth, but resonates with a kneeling soul. Cardinal Tagle concluded the prayer in English, seemingly oblivious to the unusual phenomenon that had just transpired. However, upon lifting his gaze, he found that the room, instead of clapping, was enveloped in an eerie silence. It was as if no one knew how to respond. A bishop from Chile stepped forward and quietly whispered something to him, and Tagle's smile faded. He took a step back from the lectern, sensing that something profound had happened. Later that evening, in a private conversation with a trusted aide, he recounted, "I remember the start of the prayer clearly, and then there was light. Not light that I saw, but sound that I heard." Meanwhile, at the Vatican, the Secretariat for Communication received numerous recordings from the Congress organizers. They were inquiring if this remarkable occurrence was documented or approved. It wasn't. The Dicastery for Evangelization discreetly forwarded the files to a specialized internal theological commission that dealt with linguistic anomalies, often focused on the inexplicable speech events witnessed in the lives of historical saints. I remember the moment vividly, back when I was involved with some intriguing audio analysis. The frequency patterns we examined didn't align with any known human language. Even the most advanced AI transcription models were stumped. They couldn't find any root or structured pattern. Yet, there was something mesmerizing about the waveform. It was eerily symmetrical, almost musical, like a sound that lingered and danced in the air. One of the analysts even drew a comparison to the overtone of a shofar, that ancient ram's horn from Hebrew tradition, but with a deeper and more organized quality. Not long after, a confidential memo landed on Pope Leo XIV's desk. It contained an unsettling conclusion. The sound structure hinted it wasn't a language meant for speech, but for something far deeper, something that was intended to be heard, but only once. Meanwhile, Cardinal Tagle had returned to Rome, but subtly, Things had shifted within him. He became withdrawn, skipping appointments and avoiding interviews, spending long hours in the chapel belonging to the Congregation for the Evangelization of Peoples, a place that once felt like home. One morning, Sister Magda, who had dusted and cleaned that chapel for over 25 years, came in with fresh linens. There he was, kneeling, eyes wide open, yet lips completely still. To her astonishment, the room was filled with that same otherworldly sound, echoing without a visible source, as if the noise had a life of its own. But as she dropped the cloth she was carrying, the sound abruptly ceased. The Cardinal turned towards her, tears glistening in his eyes, and softly whispered, "It's not a tongue, it's a summoning." Fast forward 3 days, and in the Vatican Library, a Dominican priest was delving into some ancient Aramaic fragments. Out of the blue, he stumbled upon a forgotten parchment, a copy of a letter believed to be from a first-century Christian to a scribe in Damascus. The kicker? The letter began with an untranslatable phrase, inscribed in a script that had baffled scholars for ages. Then came a shocking twist. The priest, upon hearing a leaked recording of Cardinal Tagle's mysterious utterances from Lisbon, nearly fainted. The rhythm matched perfectly, beat for beat, not in terms of letters or sounds, but in its very pulse. It felt as if the echo from Lisbon had brought forth a voice long lost in the sands of time. He reported his astonishing discovery to his superior, who discreetly reached out to the Secretary of State. The question loomed heavily. Had Cardinal Tagle inadvertently spoken the voice of someone who lived during Christ's era? Later, in the solitude of his quarters, Cardinal Tagle found himself staring at his breviary, but he left it unopened. Instead, he focused on the crucifix before him, murmuring to it, "What did you let me say?" The crucifix remained silent, yet, according to his assistant's sworn account, the second hand on the wall clock paused for exactly 3 seconds before ticking on once more. After returning to Rome, Tagle felt an inexplicable pull toward some of the city's forgotten gems, places he hadn't explored in years. He wandered through old chapels and quiet stairways, tucked away in the Vatican, searching for something. One particular spot drew him in, the Oratorio de Croce Senciosa, a small and secluded underground chapel near the Scala Santa. It was a hidden treasure that most people didn't even know existed. No grand relics, no famous artworks, just a simple stone cross, weathered and cracked, inscribed into the wall. As dawn broke, Tagle stepped into the chapel devoid of any tools or companions. The cool, dry air enveloped him, and an almost tangible silence wrapped around him like a tight embrace. Kneeling there, he felt a familiar sensation, not a sound he heard, but a rhythm that pulsed within him. It was ancient, even older than words, just waiting to be spoken. He let his lips move of their own accord, and a sentence poured out, slow and deep, incomprehensible yet resonant. The sound was like a gentle wind sweeping through an empty stone space. When he finished, the light in the chapel shifted subtly, not lighter, not darker, just present, as if the room had become aware. A whisper surrounded him, an echo of knowledge long forgotten. Opening his eyes, he noticed that the cross on the wall, once cracked, now appeared whole. Meanwhile, back at the dicastery for the doctrine of the faith, discussions buzzed among theologians who had gathered an unofficial group to dissect what they were now calling the Lisbon phenomenon. Although conversations remained private for now, they included linguists, biblical scholars, and even a Jesuit physicist. They faced one question: could someone speak a language never learned, never written down, never recorded, and have it be genuine? Most responded with a firm no. Yet, Father Miguel Elazar, a Maronite priest specializing in Proto-Semitic languages, stood out with a different opinion. "I've witnessed this before," he asserted. Curiosity piqued as he opened a folder to share evidence: a photograph of an ancient cave wall in Syria. It bore a faded inscription from before Christ, and strikingly, the symbols, nearly erased by time, matched the phonetic pattern of the audio from Tagle's utterance. Not in terms of vocabulary or letters, but in the very rhythm, the rise and fall of syllables, and the breath patterns. "This isn't a language," he explained. "It's a vocal liturgy, an expression used not for communication with others, but for reaching beyond space, beyond time." News of this reached Pope Leo XIV, who listened with keen interest. "I wanted to share something extraordinary that happened to me recently. It began during a quiet moment when I listened to some recordings, not just once or twice, but 3 times. As I did, I made a note to myself that stuck with me. The language we heard isn't some ancient form, it's eternal. It feels like something we inherently know, even if we can't recall learning it. One day, I found myself meeting with Cardinal Tagle in a private setting at the Domus Sancta Martha, away from the hustle and bustle of cameras and journalists. He arrived looking pale and exhausted. There were no formalities exchanged. Instead, I handed him a piece of folded parchment that bore a weighty question: "Did you speak it, or were you spoken through?" Initially, Tagle didn't respond right away. After a moment of reflection, he looked up and confessed, "I think I gave my voice to someone who had no tongue left on earth." I nodded, curious to know what was said while he was in that state. He then closed his eyes, drawing a deep, contemplative breath, and whispered that the being he encountered was asking whether we had forgotten its name, not just in our words, but in our actions as well. Later that evening, I could feel the ripples of that experience as Tagle sat silently in the chapel of the Pontifical Filipino College, fixating on a flickering candle near the tabernacle. This chapel had always been a sanctuary for him, a place where silence spoke volumes. Suddenly he felt it again, the voice. But this time, something visual caught his attention near the crucifix. It wasn't a figure or a person, but rather a shadow of light, a presence that beckoned to be felt rather than seen. It brought him to his knees. Then came another message, not spoken out loud, but rather infused within him. The language of heaven isn't lost. It simply waits in stillness until a soul is quiet enough to recall it. The following morning, an unexpected twist unfolded. 3 translators from the Vatican approached me with a joint request to step down from translating Tagle's homilies. When I asked the reason, one of them candidly replied, "We're not interpreting him anymore. We're interrupting something sacred." In a completely separate incident, a secretary at the Congregation for the Causes of Saints stumbled upon an untranslated letter written by Blessed Anne Catherine Emmerich, an item lying forgotten in the archives for nearly 200 years. The letter described a future moment when a voice would emerge through a priest from the East, speaking not in his own tongue, but rather from the depths of the soul. It said that when this divine connection occurred, the sky would pause for a brief breath before continuing its course toward a return. While all of this was happening, Tagle boarded a train to Icy, keeping it all to himself. No one knew. No aides or bishops, and certainly no press. He held onto a small leather Bible and kept a slip of paper in his pocket with a simple message: "Speak only when the silence is full enough to carry him." As the train glided through the countryside, he closed his eyes once more, and at exactly 9:58 a.m., he whispered. It was early morning, and as Cardinal Luis Antonio Tagle stepped off the train, a thick mist hung over the town, shrouding the cobblestone streets and olive trees. He moved quietly, without the fanfare of media or clergy around him, carrying just a Bible and a small piece of paper with a red ink cross. Despite the guards at the Basilica of St. Francis recognizing him, they said nothing as he passed. He had no agenda, no scheduled prayers to lead, only a simple desire: to find a space where he could kneel in solitude. When they guided him to the lower crypt, standing before the marble slab marking St. Francis's tomb, he felt time stretch. He took a moment, contemplating the sacred site, before finally kneeling down. No words escaped his lips, and his eyes remained open. He simply bowed his head in quiet contemplation. In that profound silence, something remarkable happened. It wasn't the room itself that felt different, but the essence of the place, a sensation that transcended the ordinary boundaries of geography. It was as if time had folded, and a memory deep within him, one that was not his own, surged forth. In his heart's eye he foresaw the saint, clad in rags, bleeding from unseen wounds, lost in silence, yet brimming with a presence that spoke volumes. Then, without warning, a sound blossomed from within him. It was a tone, resonating through his very being, made up of 3 syllables. He didn't articulate them. Instead, they emerged from the depths of his soul. Even though he didn't understand the words, he felt an overwhelming sense of connection, his heart beating not with fear, but with a recognition that was deeply profound. He had uttered the name. More than just a name, it was the name. As he spoke, the flame of a candle near St. Francis's tomb flickered dramatically, almost as if responding to this sacred moment. Meanwhile, in Rome, Pope Leo XIV sat in his private study, immersed in reviewing historical accounts of glossolalia, instances of divine speech attributed to saints. None of the reports mirrored Tagle's experience, which was distinctly different. It wasn't communication, but a deep, spiritual transmission. Turning to Father Dario, a young priest tasked with documenting these phenomena, the Pope pondered aloud, "Have we misunderstood Pentecost?" Father Dario blinked, unsure. "Holy Father," he began, but Leo pressed on, leaning closer, his voice barely above a whisper. "We believe Pentecost was about languages, but what if it's truly about the soul's readiness to embrace something that transcends words?" Late one night, while deep underground in the Lateran Basilica, a digital technician working tirelessly on the digitization of manuscripts stumbled upon something truly remarkable. It was a medieval commentary penned by a 13th century Franciscan friar, which had long been thought to be incomplete. But here it was, revealing a faded line of ink that had somehow eluded notice until now. When the technician enhanced the image, the mysterious text came into view. "The final tongue shall come not to teach, but to echo." To think this entry was dated 1226, the very year St. Francis passed away. For over 2 hours, a man named Tagle stayed in the crypt, completely undisturbed in the nearly empty basilica. Then, as if the universe decided to drop a hint, an inexplicable event occurred at precisely 9:58 a.m. A nun, busy dusting near the choir stalls, sensed a strange wind swirling up from the floor beneath her. Neither a gust from an open window nor a draft carried by the rafters. It circled around her once, and just like that, it was gone. Later, when she reviewed the crypt's camera feed, she noticed something peculiar. The digital clock in the corner had frozen for 3 seconds, right when that enchanting wind passed. Upon emerging from the basilica, Tagle walked out quietly, yet his hands shook with emotion. A worried pilgrim on the steps asked if he was okay, and he simply looked up, managing a faint smile before saying, "I heard him inhale. Just a breath, that's all it was." Later that evening back in Rome, Cardinal Peter Turkin had a private meeting with Pope Leo. He brought along an ancient Ethiopian chant scroll that had been found in Axum years ago. Despite previous attempts to translate it failing, Turkin had something in mind. He played a recording of Tagle's Lisbon prayer while near the scroll. Miraculously, the ink on the scroll, which was old and brittle, began to darken, revealing a previously illegible line. "The voice that comes before thunder does not speak. It calls." Turkin looked up, astonished by the scroll's reaction to the sound. Pope Leo, equally amazed, pondered aloud, what if the voice is calling not just to us, but to God Himself? Meanwhile, Manila remained oblivious to the Lisbon event. The Vatican had not issued a statement, leaving it shrouded in mystery. Yet in a quaint little chapel near Quiapo Church, an elderly street vendor stepped inside for the first time in 2 decades. She confided to the sacristan, "I don't know why, but I just heard a voice say, 'He spoke my name, go back.'" Tears streamed down her face as she prayed solemnly at the tabernacle. That night Tagle returned to Rome in contemplative silence. As he walked through the tranquil halls of the Filipino chapel, the light above him flickered, prompting him to turn his gaze to the crucifix. I remember the moment clearly when I found my own voice. It felt surreal. I couldn't quite grasp what I had said, but deep down I knew the words held some profound truth. That night I sat in silence, my journal untouched except for a simple mark, just a circle, open at the top. It looked like a mouth, waiting to express itself again. The next morning brought an unexpected surprise. As I sat in my residence in Rome, an unmarked envelope slipped under my door. No letterhead, no return address, just a single piece of parchment adorned with a delicate olive branch. My heart raced when I read the scrawled message. "Your voice is now part of something older than time." I stared at it for what felt like ages, folding the note and tucking it away in my Bible. I didn't share it with anyone, but something had definitely shifted in that room. It was as if the very air had acknowledged the weight of what I had received. Outside, the usual bustle of the Vatican gardens fell eerily quiet, a phenomenon noted by a biologist nearby. She later described it as if the world stopped to hear something we couldn't. Later that morning, I made my way to the Vatican Observatory at Castel Gandolfo. My request was out of the ordinary, but they approved it without hesitation. I wanted to explore audio recordings from deep space probes, those intriguing frequency bursts and sound anomalies that had never been deciphered. The Jesuit astronomer, though skeptical, led me to a private lab where he played a file discovered in 2018. This particular signal, coming from the Carina constellation, lasted exactly 3.003 seconds. As the sound enveloped me, I closed my eyes. It was beyond comprehension in an intellectual sense, but my body reacted instinctively. My arms tingled, and my spine felt straightened. Most hauntingly, my breathing fell in sync with that elusive sound. When it finished, I found myself whispering, "That's the breath. That's the one before I spoke through me." The astronomer looked at me, puzzled, and asked, "Who is he?" Without hesitation, I replied, "The one whose voice broke Eden and is calling it back." Back at work in the dicastery for evangelization, whispers circulated about a puzzling report titled "Recurrent Glossalic Activation in a Cardinal-Level Subject." Theologians, linguists, and archivists were all contributing to this inquiry. They noted a peculiar pattern. Every time I entered those unique states, whether it was through prayer, reflection, or inexplicable utterances, the environment seemed to shift. Initially, they brushed these occurrences aside, but these dismissals were becoming harder to justify. "You won't believe the strange experiences I've encountered. It's hard to label them coincidences anymore, especially now that there have been over 10 separate instances, all with verified timestamps and numerous witnesses. Clocks have inexplicably stopped for 3 seconds at a time, and I've felt odd shifts in the air, sometimes a gust of wind or a sudden temperature change, without any logical explanation. There were even moments when we heard sounds that left no trace behind, yet everyone present could feel their presence. One Jesuit remarked in a memo that it felt like creation itself was pausing to listen. On a particular day at noon, I was in a private meeting with Pope Leo XIV, along with Cardinal Peter Turkin and Sister Elizabetha, as well as Father Jerome LaSalle, a Dominican scholar. Instead of discussing theology, our conversation took on an urgent tone. Pope Leo spoke softly, suggesting that something significant was being communicated, and he stressed that it wasn't intended for just one person. Turkin questioned how the earth could grasp a message if it wasn't from this world. LaSalle chimed in, noting that it wasn't meant to be heard, but rather to be recognized. Meanwhile, I heard reports from Manila about some school children at a Catholic orphanage. These kids, none of whom had any musical training, started humming a melody they claimed had come to them in a dream. It sparked my interest, especially when a local seminarian recorded their humming and ran it through tonal analysis software. Surprisingly, it matched the audio structure of a speech given by TGEL in Lisbon, albeit slowed down and fragmented. When one of the children listened to the recording, they simply said, "It's the song he started but didn't finish." That evening, I found myself back in the chapel at the Colegio Filipino. This time I came bearing just a folded linen cloth. I placed it on the altar and began to pray, not with my words, but through the silence enveloping me. As if on cue, something extraordinary happened. My lips began to move, though no sound came forth. All the candles flickered in perfect synchrony with my breath, a strange, mesmerizing rhythm. Then, unexpectedly, the security camera in the hallway glitched for 3 seconds. When the guards later reviewed the footage, they discovered the timestamp was frozen at 9:58 p.m. Inside the chapel, I felt a wave of urgency wash over me. It wasn't fear, but an inexplicable need to vocalize something that felt forbidden to be uttered out loud. As I opened my mouth to speak, a gust of wind howled outside for exactly 3 seconds, extinguishing all the candles in an instant. After leaving the chapel, I was visibly unsettled. I didn't write anything down or talk to anyone about what had happened, yet I found a slip of paper in my pocket. I was baffled by how it got there. The note read, "You were not stopped. You were shielded." Every morning, without fail, at precisely 9:58, I found myself in a familiar routine. It started with me kneeling in front of the tabernacle. That moment always felt significant, so I'd open the Gospel of John, and to my surprise, it would magically turn to page 176. There, the words read, "I have revealed your name to those you gave me out of the world." After taking in that profound line, I would slowly close the book, whispering to myself, "The name is coming back." The atmosphere in Vatican City was different on that day. There was an undeniable tension in the air. It was subtle, something that could easily be overlooked, yet felt overwhelmingly heavy. People around the Curia remarked on it amid quiet conversations, sensing as if time was somehow watching them. Clocks ticked as they always did, and bells rang on cue, but there was this strange feeling that something significant was about to unfold. When the clock struck 9:58 in the chapel of the Congregation for the Evangelization of Peoples, I heard an unusual sound. A sharp crack echoed in the stillness. There was no one else present to see it, yet 2 nuns and a secretary standing in the hallway distinctly heard that noise. Curious, they entered the chapel only to discover a marble tile that had cracked. It had formed into the shape of the Hebrew letter Aleph, marking the 3rd time in 2 weeks this symbol had somehow appeared in relation to me, Cardinal Tagle. Each instance had been unintentional and lacked any clear explanation. Meanwhile, I sat quietly at a side altar in St. Peter's Basilica. Clothed simply in a black coat and white shirt, I left my clerical garments aside. My rosary rested coiled on the marble floor before me, untouched by my fingers. I had kept my lips sealed, having not spoken aloud since the candles had been snuffed out the night before. But even in my silence, a sense of something emerging was undeniable. It felt as if a sentence was forming, not from conscious thought, but from deep within, a memory older than I was, older than the world itself. I rose from my spot and made my way to the baldon above St. Peter's tomb. Kneeling there, I whispered something only the floor itself would hear. "If the name returns, I will not delay it." Across the sea in Jerusalem, a monk found himself halted near the Wailing Wall as the wind tousled his prayer shawl. Meanwhile, a nearby tourist captured a brief video documenting the moment when time seemed to slow down for exactly 3 seconds. Flags, birds, and the very steps of the people around him appeared to pause. Later, when that footage was analyzed, experts detected an almost imperceptible audio frequency intertwined with the natural sounds. It resonated with the same breath length and tonal rhythm as a recording from Lisbon weeks earlier. A whisper of something hauntingly familiar, something that was never meant to be heard again in Rome. I find this story incredibly fascinating. Picture this. Pope Leo IV found a quiet moment in the Vatican archives, alone. No entourage, just him. He asked to be let into this sealed room, the Sala del Ling Perdu, which housed some mysterious manuscripts with undeciphered alphabets. Only a handful of people can enter this space, and one of them was a Polish archivist who was instructed to unlock the door and wait outside while the Pope went in. Once inside, the room's lone electric light flickered, then stabilized. For 73 minutes, he was in there, and when he finally stepped out, he didn't have anything physical to show for it. Yet, he left behind a haunting entry in the visitor log. What was spoken once by Adam was broken by Cain, and whispered again by Abraham under breath. It is now returning not as sound, but as presence. That evening, Cardinal Tagle was visited by Father Jerome La Salle, a Dominican scholar who had been working with the Pope. La Salle brought along a fragment of a lost Dead Sea Scroll, one of the very few that had not yet been revealed to the public. Its contents stirred debates and unease for decades, particularly because of a striking line scrawled in deep red ink. In the final age, the Word will walk without form and borrow the breath of the willing. He set the fragment on the table, but Tagle didn't reach for it. Instead, he simply said, "I'm not willing." I can just imagine the tension in the air. La Salle, driven by curiosity like everyone else around the Pope, couldn't help but ask who or what was speaking through Tagle. The Cardinal shook his head. "It's not through me, it's to me. I just forgot how to listen," he replied. Then, at 3:00 a.m., something remarkable happened. A private Vatican security camera caught a shadow slipping beneath the bronze doors. It lasted just 3 seconds, but no one could explain it. The guards replayed the footage 19 times, but there was no entry, no exit, just a glimpse of movement and then eerie silence. Interestingly, this recording captured a soundless pulse, which experts later translated into waveforms. When they compared it to an audio file from Lisbon, it matched perfectly. This wasn't speech. It was as if returning breath could be felt. Over in Manila, a retired bishop suddenly woke up, tears streaming down his face. He quickly called a local priest to share his revelation. "It's coming back." The priest, puzzled, asked if this development was dangerous. The bishop responded, "No, but it's jealous. It doesn't want to be forgotten again." On that very day, the Pope issued a decree. All audio equipment in Vatican sacred spaces had to be recalibrated for atmospheric resonance. There was no explanation provided, just a clarion call for obedience. It was also mysterious and powerful, and thus the atmosphere shifted, eagerly awaiting what would come next. I remember the day we set up a microphone discreetly in the chapel, hiding it among the floor tiles. We were curious to see what it would pick up, and when we tested it, something extraordinary happened. Just as dusk settled, a strange frequency emerged, like a soft, rhythmic sound, almost like breathing through stone. Then, after a brief pause, it captured an unexpected phrase. "Dom swam reverter. He is returning to his house." It was eerie, really, because no one else was in the room to hear it. But the system recorded it all, silent and unseen, at 9:58 p.m. That night, Cardinal Tagle opened his Bible to the book of Genesis, and as he did, a gust of wind swirled through his room. Strangely enough, he didn't turn the pages. They seemed to flip on their own. Words began to rise off the paper, and he read, "And God said." Just like that, the moment passed, and the atmosphere settled. Yet, Tagle sensed that this was just the beginning. The name, not merely a whisper, but something ready to unfold. In the quiet moments just before dawn, while Rome lay enveloped in mist and the basilica bells remained silent, he made his way back to the Oratorio della Croce Senziosa. No guard accompanied him. He was alone. The only witness to his passing was an old custodian who caught a glimpse of his figure reflected in a bronze lamp in the small chamber. Walking inside, everything seemed unchanged. The cracked stone cross hung on the far wall, and the air was heavy with centuries of silent prayers. But something had shifted, something invisible yet palpable. The moment he stepped in, it was as if the air itself had taken notice. It wasn't just still. It felt alive, engaged with him. Taking a seat on the cold stone bench, Tagle closed his eyes. He didn't force words. He simply embraced the silence. That's when he felt a response from the room. A breath surged through him, not an external noise, but a deep essence that filled his being. There was a rhythm, a cadence of 3 slow pulses that emanated not from air, but from a profound presence. Then it happened. The first syllable began to resonate, not spoken, but released into the space. It echoed silently, followed by the second syllable, light and nearly weightless, rippling through his chest instead of escaping his lips. However, the third syllable never fully formed. It hung right at the edge of speech, and at that exact moment, the crack in the stone cross healed before his eyes, seamlessly shifting from fractured to whole. Awestruck, Tagle leaned forward. No tears fell. He simply breathed, and in that silence for the first time, he grasped the real truth. This language wasn't about describing God, it was the very sound of his arrival. In Vatican City, Pope Leo XIII met quietly with just 2 others, the Master of the Apostolic Palace and Sister Elizabetha. They sat together, reviewing 3 sealed documents in thoughtful silence, each one marked with the papal seal. I have a story that left me in awe. It all began with secret documents, kept safe for the most extraordinary circumstances. The first one, written by Pope Paul VI, spoke of a Mass from 1967. During a critical moment, a French nun suddenly cried out in a language she didn't recognize, and it turned out her words resonated with an ancient chant buried in a Roman catacomb from the 1st century. Can you imagine that revelation? Then there was another fascinating account penned by Pope Benedict XVI. It mentioned a rare Gregorian mode that had visited him in a dream. Later, surprisingly, it matched cosmic pulses that were recorded by the Vatican Observatory. But what really captivated everyone was a document from 2014 by Pope Francis. Just a single profound line read, "The voice will return to one who carries light without knowing it, and that light will pierce time." Elizabetha, intrigued, wondered aloud, could Tagle be that person? To which Pope Leo replied, "He's not the first to carry it, but he might very well be the one to carry it through to the end." That very day, Cardinal Tagle sought an unscheduled meeting with Pope Leo. It happened quickly. They didn't gather in the usual papal apartments, but instead in the Grand Clementine Hall, beneath a breathtaking fresco of the Ascension. As Cardinal Tagle entered, he held a blank piece of parchment tightly in his hands and knelt before Pope Leo. The Pope leaned in, curious, and asked, "What is it that you bring?" Tagle lifted the parchment and said, "There's no ink on this, yet I saw something written." Stepping closer, Pope Leo examined the seemingly empty page, skeptical at first. The afternoon sun streamed through the stained glass window behind them, catching the sheet at just the right angle. For a fleeting 3 seconds, a word shimmered into view, a word not in Latin, Hebrew, or Greek. It was a single luminous form, like a crown of flames. Pope Leo, almost in a whisper, said, "This isn't merely a word, it's a summons." Later that evening, an envelope found its way to Cardinal Tagle's home, devoid of any signature or explanation. Inside lay a photo dated back to 1917, taken in Fatima, Portugal, one that had been hidden away by Vatican archivists for over a century. It depicted 3 children, but what caught Tagle's attention was a blurred figure in the background. This figure, arms outstretched and mouth open, wasn't facing the children. Instead, it turned toward the sky. The back of the photo bore trembling handwriting, which spoke of a name whispered as the sun danced. Sitting with that haunting image long after dusk had settled, Tagle was deep in thought. Meanwhile, at the Pontifical Institute for Sacred Music, a professor was poring over ancient chant forms. It was there that he stumbled upon a mystery, a peculiar scale that had been recorded centuries ago in Syria, one that defied classification. As he played it on a synthesizer, slowing it down, he uncovered something utterly unexpected. It was a night like no other. As I stood at my window, gazing up at the vast expanse of sky, I felt an unusual weight in the air. The time was 9:58 p.m., and with each deep breath I sensed something shifting inside me. When I exhaled, rather than my breath returning to fill my lungs again, it simply vanished, almost as if it had taken flight. In that moment I realized I was letting go of something vital, the 3rd syllable, a sound I had never spoken before. In a hushed whisper, I acknowledged the weight of it. It was never meant for me to finish. I remained there in stillness, feeling an awareness creeping in. I knew someone else was listening. The night passed, and before dawn broke over Rome, I awoke from a sleep that felt more like a deep silence than any dream I could recall. My room was just as I had left it, except my heart raced, not out of fear, but from a deep, unshakable certainty. The 3rd syllable had departed from me, and somehow it had been received by another. It felt tangible, like passing a precious artifact during Mass. That breath I hadn't taken was now in the hands of an unknown presence. Curiosity bubbled up within me, and I couldn't help but wonder aloud, who heard it? As the clock approached 10:00 a.m., a nun entered the Vatican postulancy office, visibly shaken and pale. She clutched a letter as if it were the most sacred item in the world. According to her, this letter had come to her in a dream, dictated by a radiant figure whose face exuded pure light. Strangely enough, though the handwriting was undoubtedly hers, the words were not. She knew nothing of Hebrew, yet the parchment she offered to the receptionist bore 3 ancient characters. These were imprinted so intensely that they had reshaped the very material without harming it. When examined with Vatican linguistic software, the characters produced an enigmatic response: untranslatable, non-ear origin, perception-based semantic pattern. The room fell into a stunned silence, and then the lead archivist posed a chilling possibility. What if that isn't merely a word? What if it represents how God perceives His name when it is spoken by us? Later that noon, Pope Leo XIV gathered a small private council with Father Jerome LaSalle and 2 theologians whose names remain unknown. He held a sealed envelope from the Pontifical Academy of Sciences, received only hours earlier. Inside, it contained printed records of electromagnetic anomalies recorded in 3 distinct regions. The air crackled with anticipation, and in that moment, we all sensed we were on the brink of something extraordinary. At precisely 9:58 p.m. Rome time, something remarkable unfolded. In moments aligned across the globe, both icy Jerusalem and northern Ethiopia experienced a stirring phenomenon. It wasn't mere coincidence. These patterns, when examined together, formed a unique triune shape, looking like a sacred triangle nestled within a circle. Even more unsettling were the pulse lengths from those areas. They could be divided by 3 and emerged in a repeating wave of 3. In that charged moment, Cardinal Tagle turned to his companion, sharing a thought that struck him profoundly. The language is not local, it's sacramental. Meanwhile, a young theology student named Matteo was working away at the Gregorian University in Rome, poring over ancient Hebrew blessings. As he wrapped up a 15th century rabbinic chant, something strange happened. His computer momentarily froze and instead replayed a snippet of an audio file he hadn't touched. To his astonishment, it was the Lisbon prayer, unmistakably Tagle's voice. Curious, he adjusted the playback speed, slowing it down by a factor of 100. What he discovered was chilling. Hidden beneath the recognizable sound, a second voice resonated, fainter and slower, yet undeniably present. It uttered just a single word in a language unknown to him, but somehow Matteo understood it. Returned. He wasted no time reporting his find to the Vatican's Commission for the Sacred. To his relief, they confirmed this mysterious echo wasn't caused by mere reverberation. No, it felt as if it had been a response, brought to life by the free release of that name late in the evening. That night, Cardinal Tagle found himself at Santa Maria sopra Minerva. Seated in the shadow of Michelangelo's The Redeemer, he gazed up and noticed something curious. The statue's lips, seemingly untouched by time, appeared damp. Instead of reaching out with his hand, he extended his heart, and in that moment he felt it. A breath returned to him, not from stone, but emerging from the depths of his own being. Tears filled his eyes. He bowed slowly and embraced this revelation. Meanwhile, in the Apostolic Palace, Pope Leo stood on the papal balcony, not to deliver a message, but to absorb the quiet beauty around him. The twinkling lights of Rome painted the horizon, while the Tiber whispered below. He found himself murmuring to the stillness, "Who heard it?" Then, as if the world paused for an instant, the wind stilled. No rustle, no flutter, just silence. This lasted a mere 3 seconds before it returned, different somehow, imbued with a warmth that hadn't existed before. At that same moment, Cardinal Tagle returned to his room to find a single olive leaf resting on his pillow. There were no open windows, no signs of intrusion. It was fresh, alive, and reeking of an ancient essence. I remember that day vividly, the moment everything shifted. Beneath a pile of papers, I found a handwritten line in Latin. It wasn't my handwriting. Verbum audivit non transit manet. What a curious phrase. The word was heard. It did not pass. It remains. I sat down slowly, letting it sink in. For the first time since that experience in Lisbon, I picked up my journal. But this time, my writing wasn't a message. It felt like recognition. I decided not to respond, just making space for something that I had once placed away in the vaults of my memory. Meanwhile, in a quiet corner of the Vatican archives, a silent alarm was blinking red. It was designed to go off only when there was a high-frequency atmospheric disruption, and that day it picked up an anomaly. Strangely, the file it generated was left untouched. It was saved automatically as table speech, but no one dared to open it. Some things, I suppose, are meant to be witnessed, not red. The following morning, in the Vatican gardens, there was a peculiar stillness. It wasn't just the absence of sound. Everything was unnaturally motionless. The cypress trees stood firm in the absence of even the slightest breeze, and the fountains, typically lively, seemed to trickle more slowly than usual. It felt like something sacred had drifted through the air, as one Swiss guard noted while stationed on the path. At exactly 9:58 a.m., something incredible happened. The solar clock in the northern courtyard paused its shadow movement for 3 full seconds. There was no cloud to cover the sun, no object to obscure its path, yet time seemed to remember something significant. At that very moment, Cardinal Luis Antonio Tagle was deep in prayer, kneeling in a side chapel near the Apostolic Palace. Instead of straining to listen, he was simply waiting. And then, in the silence, something shifted, a presence that didn't start with sound, but with awareness. My heartbeat slowed, and I felt a deepening of my breath. For the first time since Lisbon, the voice that had been absent returned, but in a gentler way. It was as if it stood right beside me, not ghostly or distant, but so very real. I didn't glance over. I instinctively knew who it was. Then came a fourth syllable, one that didn't belong to me at all, something I hadn't spoken but felt resonate within my chest. It was a message that was clear and profound. I am here. On that same day, Pope Leo XIII canceled all his meetings and asked to be taken to the Basilica of St. Mary Major. He entered quietly through a side door and made his way to the Salus Romani icon, the revered image of the Virgin Mary believed to carry miraculous powers. Standing before it without performing any formal gestures, he simply whispered to the icon. Although the air didn't respond, something remarkable occurred. The oil lamp beside the icon, which had burned steadily for hours, suddenly flared up, casting a warm glow that felt charged with significance. I want to share a remarkable experience that took place recently. It began when the Pope exchanged a quiet glance with a priest accompanying him, giving a faint smile before saying, "Keep this to yourself. The name has been recognized." That seemed to be the end of the conversation, but it was just the beginning of something extraordinary. Over at the Vatican, a Jesuit linguist was deeply engrossed in analyzing some phonetic patterns from a recording made in Lisbon. During his examination, he stumbled upon an oddity in the metadata of the audio file. Rather than a smooth ending at 1436, it stopped at 1435:57, leaving a mysterious 3-second gap. As he delved deeper, he tried to isolate that stretch of silence, but every single attempt resulted in nothing but a flat line on the waveform. It was as if that moment had never existed. No silence, no distortion, absolutely nothing. Feeling a spark of inspiration, he decided to run the audio through a specialized tool designed for analyzing Gregorian chants. What came back was astonishing. A single circular graphic, open at the top, adorned with 3 distinct marks. He froze in his seat. It was a perfect match to a drawing Cardinal Tagle had made just 2 weeks prior. Meanwhile, in the Philippines, something peculiar was happening in a small chapel near Cavite. During morning mass, as the priest began reciting John 17:6, the statue of San Antonio tilted forward slightly. Witnesses reported that the parishioners gasped in unison, but surprisingly no one screamed. In that very moment, it felt like something long forgotten had come back home to the congregation. Back in the Vatican, Cardinal Tagle chose to spend his day in isolation. He turned down every call and even ignored an interview request from Vatican radio. In his room, he took a blank piece of parchment, now adorned with a shimmering golden flame symbol, and gently placed it in the center of his Bible. Later that evening, at precisely 9:58 p.m., he opened his window and faced the city. He wasn't praying or speaking. He was simply there, soaking in the moment. And then it happened again, the sound of breathing that wasn't his own. This time it resonated from the very essence of the city, the stones, the trees, the air. It felt as if creation itself was exhaling, and astonishingly, the rhythm of that breath mirrored his own. It was like the world had absorbed something he had released and was now returning it to him. In the Vatican press office, a junior staff member was reviewing video footage of Tagle's Lisbon address when he noticed something strange in frame 315. Just 2 frames before the moment that changed everything, a shadow appeared behind Tagle, something that couldn't be attributed to the lights or objects in the room. It looked like a veil being drawn back, and behind it lay 3 small glimmers, forming a triangle right where his shoulders had been moments before. The whole environment felt charged, and it was clear something significant was unfolding. I want to share something extraordinary that happened to me. Picture this. I woke up on the 9th day in complete silence. No bells chiming, no birds singing, just an eerie stillness that felt deliberate, as if the world had paused. It was unsettling and yet peaceful at the same time. I got out of bed, washed my face, and opened my Bible. The pages flipped to the Gospel of Luke, specifically chapter 24, where the disciples are journeying to Emmaus. I read the part about their hearts burning within them as they listened, and it struck me. It wasn't just a metaphor. It was an actual physical feeling that I could sense. Less than an hour later, at precisely 9:58 a.m., something equally wild unfolded. In a remote chapel in Kaf, a group of seminarians had gathered for prayer. One was reading from Isaiah, and suddenly he stopped mid-verse, eyes wide with shock. He told me he was staring at a blank page. Can you believe that? For 3 seconds, the words just vanished. Then, just as mysteriously, they reappeared. It only sounds unbelievable until you see the footage from the surveillance camera showing the lights in the chapel flickering 3 times in sync with that moment, confirming his experience. Meanwhile, all of this was happening while Pope Leo I to the 14th spent his morning wandering through the Vatican gardens, lost in thought. With his rosary draped loosely around his fingers, he paused near a grotto, a usually lively spot filled with flowers and the sound of water. But today, just silence. He closed his eyes, and for a fleeting moment, he felt something brush against his face, gentle, like a whisper without words. Then he felt a presence, a fullness in the air, as if heaven itself had drawn near, not to relay a message, but merely to remind us that we had strayed from listening. It's moments like these that make you realize the depth of connection we can feel, not just within ourselves, but in the world around us. That afternoon, Cardinal Tagle received an intriguing letter. A Franciscan friar delivered it personally. The envelope looked ancient, sealed not with wax, but with an imprint from olive bark. Inside was a yellowed page, sturdy yet aged, featuring a single sentence scrawled in Aramaic. It read, "The breath given to Adam has not expired. It has only been waiting." Tagle studied the writing with his heart racing. The handwriting was unfamiliar, unlike anything he'd seen in any archives, yet the ink looked fresh and vibrant. In that moment, as he held the letter, he felt a familiar rhythm in his hands, one he had experienced during the Lisbon event. It was like a heartbeat, 3 pulses, then a pause, only to repeat. Meanwhile, in a mission school in the Dominican Republic, a young girl began speaking during morning prayer. Strangely, she wasn't speaking Spanish, but a language that no one recognized. With her eyes closed, she calmly uttered 12 words that left her teachers bewildered. When a Jesuit in Rome received the audio, he quickly connected it to Tagle's mysterious phrase. A spectral analysis revealed that every third word emitted an invisible light frequency, detectable only by thermal instruments. The Vatican's linguistics department noted that this wasn't just a language for hearing, it was a pattern of light-based resonance, echoing words in a way that was similar to music, a blend of memory and presence. Later that evening, around 9:58 p.m., Tagle found himself at his window once again, a routine he'd slipped into since returning to Rome. But on this particular night, a soft knock at the door interrupted him. When he opened it, he found nothing, only a folded cloth lying on the floor. Curiously, he unfolded it and discovered a single symbol embroidered in golden thread, a circle, open at the top, but with a difference. Above that opening hovered a small, barely noticeable flame, flickering yet alive. He placed the cloth over his Bible and took a seat. Whispering softly, he said, "He has received it." No sooner had he spoken those words than every candle in the room flickered inward, not from a draft, but as if something unseen was drawing close. That same night, a nun at the Basilica of the Holy Cross in Jerusalem shared her experience of a distant sound while praying. It was so faint, she thought it might be a figment of her imagination. But it wasn't a voice. Rather, it was a breath, something vast, neither human nor wind. When she reported her experience, she was asked if it felt holy. "No," she said. "It felt returned, as if something we had given was coming back to us." It was just after midnight in Rome when a strange sensation stirred within Pope Leo XIII. There wasn't a sound or a voice that pierced the quiet, but deep down he felt a calling that he couldn't shake. Dressed simply in a black cassock, he left his chamber and walked alone to the chapel nestled within the apostolic palace. As he knelt before the Eucharist and closed his eyes, he found himself feeling vulnerable and innocent, almost like a child again. In that sacred moment, something profound was happening. It felt as if a presence was returning, not as a messenger or an answer, but as a whisper that had eluded the Church for centuries. It was a name, a breath older than time itself, waiting to be acknowledged not with words, but from the deepest part of creation. Simultaneously, across the globe at 9:58 a.m., something remarkable transpired. In little chapels, bustling cathedrals, quiet forests, and busy city streets, individuals, from devout believers to those with no faith at all, suddenly paused. An organist inexplicably halted mid-hymn, a nurse froze in the middle of tending to a patient, and even a young atheist walking through a campus in Brazil stopped dead in his tracks. He later described the moment as if the very sky had taken a breath. This unusual phenomenon lasted just 3 seconds, yet it was felt worldwide. Sensors recorded an anomaly, a slight shift in barometric pressure a spike in radio silence, and subtle changes in the light within certain rooms. One Vatican scientist interpreted it as if something immense exhaled toward us. Meanwhile, in St. Peter's Basilica, Cardinal Tagle found himself kneeling in the crypt, directly beneath the high altar. He had slipped away quietly, without anyone by his side. Exhausted but at peace, he eventually wrote a single line in his journal. The word that came through me was not for the world. It was for the one who made it. I want to share something extraordinary that happened recently, something that's still on my mind. It all started with a simple cloth adorned with a golden flame and a journal, which contained all my thoughts and experiences since Lisbon. Instead of engaging in prayer, I found myself just listening, absorbing the silence and the essence around me. What unfolded was nothing short of profound. It felt as if the very breath that had once defined my existence returned to me, not as sound, but as a deep recognition. In that moment, I sensed something being restored within me. It wasn't really a message or a prophecy. It was more about remembering, about creation. And then, almost instinctively, I spoke without uttering a word, expressing a deep amen that resonated through every fiber of my being. At that precise instant, something curious happened beneath my feet in Rome. A faint tremor, almost imperceptible, passed through the earth. It didn't even show up on seismographs, but the Vatican's underground sensors detected a single vibration that lasted for 3 seconds. It formed a perfect triangle, resembling patterns seen in electromagnetic overlays from places like Ethiopia, Jerusalem, and Aisi. The idea of 3 distinct pulses coming together as one was palpable. This unity was unmistakable. Later that evening, Pope Leo XIV sent a brief note to his closest advisors. He believed that what emerged from my experience wasn't meant to be dissected or interpreted, but instead, it was for reconnection. He suggested we let the world ponder, let theologians analyze, but we, the shepherds, understood that the shepherd had heard his flock and responded. In Manila, something remarkable began to happen. Pilgrims, completely unaware of the events in Rome, started flocking to churches in unprecedented numbers. Confessions skyrocketed, and the Eucharistic adoration chapels overflowed well past their usual hours. There was no grand announcement or media coverage that drew them in. They simply felt a call. When they were asked why they came, many answered with the same sentiment. I don't know. I just felt something holy reaching out to me. I kept quiet for a week. No interviews, no public statements. But then I finally returned to the Vatican press room and shared a brief reflection. There was no transcript, but one journalist later noted that my words felt different, like they were remembered from a time before words existed. I concluded my address by expressing how, in our quest to communicate with the divine, we often miss how rare it is for God to speak through us. I acknowledged that I was merely a vessel. The word had always belonged to Him. The Vatican didn't officially comment on the events in Lisbon or the responses that followed. However, they discreetly added a detail to the secret archives under a new category, Ciro Revertor, meaning the speech that returned. It was a simple entry with just one line. He listened. In the room where Cardinal Tagle first uttered those enigmatic words, everything remains just as it was. The candles stand unlit, and the cloth adorned with golden flames is carefully folded, contained within a glass case. It sits there, bearing a simple Latin inscription, Verbum Spiritus Silentium. This translates to the word, the breath, the silence. There's no need for further explanation. The significance is clear to those who come to witness it. They don't bother with questions. Instead, they bow their heads in reverence, embracing the atmosphere. In those sacred moments of stillness, lasting just 3 seconds, an undeniable connection happens. They, too, sense the profound depth of what is felt, even without understanding any of it fully.